I just want to note that, yes, it's 20 years, but that's 20 years since the first survey, but there's a process to make that an actual reality. And that's the first part of this session. Gregg Thompson's going to join me, and I'll introduce him a little bit later in regard to how this all evolved and these kinds of things. And then in the second half, we'll have a discussion with our panelists, which I'm really looking forward to. I want to say that, SERU, as I noted before, is a deeply collaborative project. I mean, that's what made it work, and that's what makes it run, and it also what makes it kind of complicated at times. But like anything, there is a beginning, and the beginning was I had been at UC Santa Barbara for quite some time, and I had worked in IR there in that office while working on my PhD in history. And then I had a chance to come up here to be at the center here at Berkeley and to work part-time as the policy person for the UC-wide Academic Senate in the Office of the President, which is down in Oakland. And so I had been making some trips to Santa Barbara, and I knew some things about IR functions and these kinds of things and what was needed in data. And I knew Dick Flax very well, who was a good friend and a sociologist and a professor of sociology at UC Santa Barbara. And he had recently done a survey that really focused on how much students were partying. and they were partying a lot, according to his data, but with certain racial biases, let's say that. More white people were partying than others, but within Santa Barbara's population at that time, which has really changed, the undergraduate population has changed a lot. So I thought, well, gosh, I wasn't aware of any, systematic, system-wide effort at data collection on the student experience. So I invited Dick to lunch, and we had lunch at the faculty club at UC Santa Barbara. And we explored the concept of a system-wide survey and how to do that. And of course, I was fishing a little bit because I was at the Center for Studies in Higher Ed and thinking about what kind of small empires we might build over time. And I had obviously connections with people at UC Santa Barbara, UC Office of the President, including Dennis Galligani at that time, who was, I'm forgetting his full title, but he was basically the head of undergraduate ed. The vice presidents, I'm losing track, and Linda Guerra there as well. And Linda, I have to note this because I remember it very well, had been thinking and trying to do something like this for some time. But at that point, the Office of the President's ability to cajole the campuses to join in such an effort, at least this is what I understood from Linda, was very limited, and it wasn't going to happen. And so I was promoting the concept that it's something that could become out of an academic research unit, but a collaborative with institutional researchers. And I put a proposal together, and we have some money from the Office of the President, directly from Dennis Galligani. And we put together, Dick Flax and I, an oversight group, which included academics and folks from the IR offices. And this evolved into a proposal that said, yes, this is a viable thing to do, and that we should proceed and put together a team to try to do this. And Gregg Thompson was very early on, shortly after the proposal was put in, and I got to know him when I was at Berkeley, key to developing this project, because I am not an expert at survey research. I know the value of it, but Gregg had been doing fantastic work here at Berkeley to begin with, so he was a natural compatriot in this early development. I want to really quickly, just because I know there are still some folks still out there who in the IR side were so important in the development early on of what became UCU's, the University of California Student Experience Survey. And they included Bill Armstrong, who's I think might be joining us today. Bill's been all super important all through it. Bob Cox, who was then at LA. Steve Chapman, who later became really important in the development of our association and expansion to the a group of AAU institutions that showed interest after we had developed the first survey, which was administered in 2002, and the second in 2004. Julian Fernald at UC Santa Cruz, who will join us later. Danny Kim at UC Riverside. Judith Roshlin-Klonsky at Los Angeles. Judy Shoemaker at Irvine. And besides Gregg, of course, Steve Velasco at Santa Barbara. So a number of those people are still in their positions or elevated positions on their campuses, and I just wanted to make a shout out. This gives a very brief outline of how this all happened over time, and it built momentum over time. And again, Steve Chapman was really important in our conceptualizations that maybe we could expand the number of institutions that were interested. And really one of the primary movers was the University of Minnesota approached us and said, we see value in what you're doing. This is still only an undergraduate survey. And can we, maybe use the survey? And that was the bridge that brought us to a much larger conceptual idea of what the project was about. There was the Suru project. We used to call it Suru 21, the 21st century. Well, we get rid of that. It's a bad acronym already, I think, but in any case, we're stuck with it. And so in 2014, we did all the surveys locally here at Berkeley for a period. I'm forgetting what year that we transitioned on the UQ side to the UC Office of the President administering the survey. So that's the one anomaly in the grouping. But in 2014, for reasons that I can't get into, we made an agreement with Minnesota to administer the AU component of the survey, and and then also very shortly, I think it was around, and I'm sorry I don't have it on this screen. Oh no, there's 2012. I had been doing international work and saw interest in the surveys internationally, so we had an opportunity to have expanded even further, which I think has brought value to the project significantly. Again, this conceptual idea is that this is a survey that, yes, does meet administrative needs, but it's also based in scholarly work and around the concept of engagement, and that there's a research side to it. And I'll talk briefly a little bit about that, and I hope maybe in our session with our panelists as well. So now, this is just an outline. It's a little dated. There's some variance going on with various members, but this is the membership list close to reality. When you have contracts, things vary, and on the international side, there's lots of variance going on. So now, Gregg is going to talk a little bit about the early years of the survey administration. As I noted to you, Gregg was an important collaborator. He joined very early on after we had the proposal and some money to try to organize this from the Office of the President. And he was at that time the Director of Student Research, right? It was the Office of Student Research when we had one here like that at Berkeley, and has been, vital in the development of the survey, including later on our graduate survey, which is another expansion of our project base, which I should make a shout out for Daniel White-Jones as well, as how important he was in the development of that. So with that, now we'll have Gregg join us and give his presentation.
What do I push?
I'll do it for you, or it's right there.
Oh, okay. Well, as John has already emphasized, this was a tremendously collaborative project, including academic, administrative, and institutional research partnership. For the IR group, we were very pleased to be invited to join in the project. And a couple points for us was that IR was very conservative work at that point. Our job was mainly to get the numbers right and to have no surprises. So that this was a much broader project. And the design of the project was, we moved very quickly to a full census model, which was very unusual at that point. Even the NSSE, National Student Survey of Student Engagement, only surveyed freshmen and seniors. And the design was really quite innovative. The work that we got to do as the IR group in partnership is very exciting because we had full license to explore and experiment and come up with a really good design. The design was a core around, focusing especially around the academic experiences in the majors, and then modules where 25%, initially 25% of the respondents were assigned to modules on different topics. And there was this aha moment where we realized that when you're doing a census survey, that a single module still is a larger survey than we'd ever done before. And part of it also was a so-called wild card, where each campus, each participant institution could design their own questions every year for the survey, which gave us a great deal of flexibility and buy-in. Throughout, as I've mentioned, tremendous support for innovation. I hope you can see the survey. This cartoon appeared in the Daily Cal in 2007. Hey, Joey, what's this UQ survey thing? Huh? Well, I got 7 emails from some guy named Gregg Thompson saying that he'd give me $500, an iPod, and his left kidney if I filled out some form about my experience at Cal. Oh yeah, that thing. It's like 5 pages. 5 pages. Forget that. Okay. Well, actually, a lot of people didn't just forget that. What I wanted to talk about today is 2 things. One is how we were able to achieve an extraordinarily high, by current standards, response rate and for UQs, and then secondly, the impact that UQs had made generally on our campus. So you can see that over a period of 6 years, our median response rate was about 50%. The 1 year in 2009 was 37%. I was actually out for several months at that point for medical reasons. Maybe I could attribute maybe that's the Gregg Thompson effect, 13%. I'm not sure, but anyway, great response rates. How in the world did we do that? Okay. First of all, the whole issue of getting the word out to try to encourage students to participate. We actually started out very an uphill battle because the Committee on Human Subjects at that point, where we had to get permission to do the to send the survey out, very restrictive attitude about if you send out, for example, send out 5 reminders. Wow, that's really excessive. That's really coercive on students. They had to approve word for word all our messages. So we had to work through that and that was our hardest first challenge. But eventually we did work through that and worked around it. And we had a couple of sometimes disregarded what they were told us what we were supposed to do. But the notion we came up with was to make it effective is to vary the messaging and more important, varying who the messenger came from. Sure, 7 emails from Gregg Thompson might do something, but it's not going to do a lot. So we had the notion that ultimately every Cal student would receive an invitation from someone who matters. And so we expanded the range of the messaging and so forth, so on, including having campus chancellors send out the messages. And it was sort of an inside joke to see how our chancellors succeeded. And we had some chancellors that encouraged the response rate at below chance level. But anyway, we also had very generous support for incentives, cash reward awards. This is all commonplace now, even but even then initially was a challenge. We were told initially you couldn't offer big cash incentives because it was coercive on low-income students. Of course, we now use cash awards, try to do them on a very timely manner. Okay, but what I think really worked for us is the buy-in that we got from the Cal administration and how we could actually structure where we were most concerned, and that was an intense focus. Having students within each major to significant numbers respond. So we actually, at Cal campus, there are actually directives from the chief academic officers to each department chair that this was important, and that ideally in each department, the majors received a personalized invitation from the chair, from the student affairs officer, so forth and so on. We also had the chief officer for undergraduate education volunteer. This is what I didn't even suggest this, to offer incentives to each department to reward the increased response rates. So this was our main foray into getting high response rates and meaningful response rates, so that we could then provide every department with a report of their responses. The data was actually used for program review. Secondly, the second approach was to find win-win situations with partnerships with student affairs and student groups of interest. Any group that we were concerned, that campus was concerned about learning more about or getting a high response rate, here was the deal. You help us get a high response rate for that group of interest. That'll help us, and then we'll provide you with more information you have about that particular group or segment of the student population than you've ever had before. So that was the main sort of consistent attack, and the UQs was really a full-time job. It really was. So that we ended up with an analytic power, and it was an annual survey with a 50% response rate. Just a quick point, and it might be counterintuitive, but actually doing an annual survey has some significant advantages over just doing a survey every few years. It becomes institutionalized, it becomes an expectation, and you have way more continuity in the data. So that's the response rate chapter. And then the other thing that I want to say focuses on the cultural transformation of UQs on the Berkeley campus. The first questions we used to get was, what is UQs? Natural question. And our goal was, and this was actually articulated over and over again by the time we finished our first number of years with UQs, any question about student experience or student data or student issues, the first words out of the administrator's mouth was, well, what did UQs say about that? And the chances were that UQs did have something to say about that. Part of the way we greatly expanded the amount of knowledge that we learned about Berkeley students was using the wild card very aggressively. In coming up with issues or questions of current concern, we could very quickly get data on that. We could partner with stakeholders in terms of, oh, you want to learn something about X, Y, or Z? Don't do your own survey. We'll put it on the wild card. This was a really big innovation for us in terms of collecting more in-depth information about the Berkeley students. We did use the wild card twice, for example, for advising and really broaden the whole campus concept of what the whole issue of advising was about, that was received very favorably. Also, the use of open-ended questions. I know some people shy away from open-ended questions. Oh, it's too much work. There are issues of reliability. You have to do coding, so forth, so on. It's just too much work. My perspective, and the perspective of our office, is that strategic use of open-ended questions is very, very cost-effective. And really, if our goal is to hear the student voice, that was our slogan, every voice will be heard, let the students actually express themselves through their own voices. I'll give you two examples real quickly here. One example is, I think it was 2010, we asked students at the end of the survey, now, realistically speaking, what is the one thing the university could do to improve the quality of the undergraduate education experience for students like you? The key here is, we learned that by experience, was to have the word realistic. First time we just asked the question without that, and we got all kinds of, well, just give me a $10,000 scholarship every year and I'll be happy. But by doing realistic, and just asking that question alone in that year gave us 558 responses, which could then be examined by student group and so forth and so on. So therefore, that was very effective. And then the most exceptional experience that we had was we asked students in 2005, can you identify a faculty, staff, or other person on campus that went out of their way to do something exceptionally to help you and your fellow students help solve a problem or otherwise help better your life? 4,000 students offered to nominate somebody. And then the data was so rich that we spent a summer with graduate students and work study students calling through that data and coming up with 200 plus exceptional testimony about what became known as everyday heroes. I urge you to just Google Berkeley Everyday Heroes, and you'll come up with the websites and public information about how they picked that up and broadcast to the campus community for an entire semester the testimony about how wonderful faculty staff had been for individual students. And the chancellor actually wrote personal letters of commendation to the 200 everyday heroes. And finally, to conclude here with this section, with so much data and exploring so many subjects, I made presentations all the time to various, maybe the chancellor's cabinet, managers, so forth and so on. And at one point, someone came up to me and just said, you know, you tell a good story. And that was significant. That was before storytelling was really in the IR lexicon. But what it said to me and crystallized for us is that we had changed the conception of what it means to do IR research from just counting the numbers, making sure they reacted, no surprises, to having contextualized data that we could provide to the campus on a myriad of topics and tell a good story about what the students were about. Okay, so the next point is that we wanted to sort of lay the groundwork for the panel. Okay, that was SERU then at the beginning, and what is it now? It's very interesting that the SERU project captures almost the entire trajectory of the millennial generation, and now we're fully into Gen Z. Demographics have changed, campus size have changed, certainly changed environments through social media, COVID, and so forth, and online instruction. Let me give you some quick examples. Just the size of our campuses have changed. I'm looking here at the 11 campuses that are currently scheduled to do this SERU survey. They've increased in size by maybe about 20 to 30%. But on the Berkeley, on the UC system, look at how the increased size of our campuses in this period from 2000 to 2020. Of course, Riverside being more than doubling its size. And diversity, of course, just really quickly, and these are just estimates across the different groups for the SERU member campuses doing the surveys now. 2000, their white population was about 78, now it's 59. Just very quickly, Asian, Hispanic, and international students have doubled or tripled on these campuses. And of course, at the University of California, the increase in diversity is just phenomenal. Even back in 2000, whites were only 42% of the undergraduate population. Now they're only 21%. Asian students are 33%, but that doesn't mean the number of Asian students have gone down. It just means the proportion has gone down, whether we actually have significantly more Asian students than we had in 2000. Hispanic from 13 to 27%, international from 2 to 13. One of the questions that we also are very interested in, have student responses on the survey itself actually changed? And there's some degree of continuity across the entire survey's spectrums time period. So just to take a few examples, academic experience, and I just wanted to look at Berkeley very specifically. The academic experience, satisfied or very satisfied, peaked in 2010 and it went down to 55%, went down to 48% in 2020. In each of these first academic social feeling of belonging and re-enrollment, there was a decline in 2020. How much of this was the current context of COVID or not? We'll be exploring further. Finally, one of the perennial questions in institutional research or higher education, how much time are students putting in the study? Just to take the lower threshold, 10 hours a week or fewer, that has actually gone up over this time period from 30 to 36 to 42%. One of the questions we put on originally on the survey was sleeping 6 hours or how much hours you sleep during the week. And of course, we came up with additional phenomenal hours. Students are not sleeping very much. The one, I guess, hopeful finding here is that now at least 43% of the students, only 43% are sleeping 6 hours or fewer. And then finally, just one last question that is working obviously in our minds from this presentation. Is it reasonable to expect ever that a campus could, given the current context, get back to 50% on a response rate? So if I just look at the 2020 UQ's response rates, two things stand out. One is the response rates for males are very, very low, and the gap is increasing with females. But look at what Riverside was able to accomplish last time. They are actually close to the magic, what we'll call the magic 48%. I'm sure they did something very innovative.
Okay, great. So I know our time. Whoops, it's okay. Get another chair. So I know our time is a little strained. I'm assuming, Igor, that I could bleed a little bit over. So the next section is a panel discussion. We have Steve Brint from UC Riverside, who joined the project in 2006 as a principal researcher. Pamela Brown is the vice president for institutional research and academic planning at the UC Office of the President. Julian Fernald, early on developer, was on the oversight committee, is IR director at Santa Cruz. Ron Huesman, who's a principal researcher as well from for the project and at Minnesota, and of course Gregg, as I noted before. I only want to quickly, oops, what is it not working? Sorry about that. Let's see what it does. There we go. Sorry. Okay, so you know, the uses of the data you've seen before. I just want to quickly say, you know, we've seen this broad range of internal usages. This is just a highlight, and I think maybe Pamela will talk a little bit about how it's used in the UC accountability report. External, we've had a good track record with the data being used. And I think that's the thing, being part of this consortium, all of us should feel, and everyone should strive, is the data is really used. A lot of survey data, it's hard to tell, but we can see that it's really built into institutional analysis and attempts at institutional improvement. And then on the research side, you know, we're having good success with that. If you go onto the website of the project, you can look at publications. Igor worked with a colleague to create quite a large bibliographic link to various things, and so we're doing well on this side as well. We can always do better, that's for sure. So back to the panel. I posed a series of questions to them to have a discussion, and you see them on the screen. I'll leave them there for a little bit, but the first one, which I want to pose to Ron Huesman first, is what has been the most significant cumulative impact or contribution of Suru on your campus? And then I also want to ask that same question to Pamela. Ron?
Sure. Thanks, John. Gregg, I really appreciated your background there, and I was fortunate enough to study at your feet as we jumped into the SERU consortium, and we adopted a lot of your techniques. And I think the one thing I can say cumulatively is very similar to what you were talking about. I had to explain what SERU meant a lot initially, and then it turned into what does SERU have to say when questions came up. And I think the breadth of the survey and its census approach, it gives us enough responses and enough cover in topics to answer lots of questions that come up. And so we've been able to integrate the results throughout the campus. It's become a part of the culture. It gets used externally quite often with accountability reports, with our progress card for our Board of Regents. It's part of our strategic master plan now for the system. There's results from SERU in that. It got used extensively in our Higher Learning Commission, our regional accreditation review. It gets used in specialized accreditation. But more importantly, internally, I think every undergraduate college dean looks forward to getting these results and looking at these results by majors. Now we can do it longitudinally since we've been doing this for nearly 13 years. You can start to use that information to assess the impact of various interventions. I'm thinking of advising in particular. Many colleges have tried different programs and ways of advising and to improve that experience. And now it's the information around campus climate has become really critical. With the addition of the wildcard, we were able to kind of augment that, and even it's become our campus climate survey de facto. And the special demographics that are in the survey allow us to look at groups that we traditionally don't have in our central databases. So, the LGBTQ plus communities, the students with disabilities, that information can be very difficult for an IR office to get a hold of, but we can use a survey to start looking at those subgroups and see if they have differences in their experiences. So that information is getting used extensively.
I'd only really
Yep.
quickly before going to
Yep.
Pamela is just to say
Yep.
that again, we did develop the graduate student survey component now of our
Yep.
things that we offer, and Minnesota is really key. And I need to make sure I correct Daniel Jones White, and first names has been critical in the development as well as Gregg. But how about on that side? How does the grad SERU just really quickly impacted Minnesota?
It's a similar trajectory. It's only been really 5 years now that we've been using it fully, but the dean of our graduate education has been a champion of that, and they have regular conversations with his department heads with the results, and they're using it for very similar purposes. So I think if I was going to kind of sum up the cumulative effect, it's helped encourage conversations and discussion about data. And it always is part of the conversation. It's not the source of data usually, but it does come into play. And I think that's, to me, been really the positive of being involved in the consortium, and why we've, I think, embraced SERU results on campus. And we've always been very appreciative of the opportunity that arose back in 2008, John. So thank you.
Pamela?
Yes. Thanks very much. This has been a great introduction, and I need to begin by thanking all of the UC campus colleagues that help us with administering and analyzing UQ's results. Thompson and his team spend quite a bit of time to make sure that we put the information up both in the accountability report, but also in the UC Information Center, which is our interactive dashboard that allows individuals to be able to get access to the information, the responses by campus, by student population. I've always felt that one of the biggest things for us is to be able to get the information out and in a way where individuals can see it. I say survey data has got a shelf life. We need it out as quickly as possible so we can get a better understanding of what the experience is now. And with the longer period of time that we've had in administering UQs, Thompson and his team have put up a dashboard that shows longitudinal results where you can see how things have changed over time, which I think it can be particularly powerful in looking at where there are things that have maintained the same sort of strength. Students are really, really interested in being at an institution which has research faculty on it. That's been consistently strong across the board. The value of a degree for what I pay for it has changed over time, right? And you have a way with UQs to be able to talk about what the student experience is. And for us at the system, we're often communicating out, thank you, Tongshan, we're often communicating out what the student experience is, either to the Board of Regents or to the legislature, as a way to advocate support. For us, being able to then tie that survey data to institutional data, we can illustrate the impact of different things and how it may affect student outcomes like graduation rates or other pieces like that. If I pointed to a couple things that I think have been particularly powerful over the last few years, for us being able to get UQ's data. One of them I'd point to is the inclusion of questions and the evolution of questions related to us understanding basic needs, and food security is one example. That data alone, having it across all our UC campuses and then sharing comparable information with California State University and community college campuses has been very powerful in rethinking the need for students when it comes to being hungry and what the impact of that is on their lives and their study and other things like that. There have been big evolutions about being able to get students on campus access to CalFresh, which is an aid program that allows individuals to get cash to be able to purchase goods, and the pantry programs that are there. It's a very specific example where having survey data to illustrate the issue and the problem was very effective in being able to identify means of solution to try to help. And now we've got a way to track whether that intervention is making a difference. So that I think is one. And the other one that I'd point to more recently, and this is kind of a use of a wild card, but on a system-wide way, was when we went and shifted to remote instruction and the COVID period. It happened right as we were going to administer youth, and we were able to incorporate questions in there, including questions about whether students would be returning to the campus in the fall. We'd have a good sense of the new student population from SIR data, but with it, we just weren't quite sure what was going to happen with the continuing population. And so we were able to include questions and get that information out in a timely way. We did it different than we normally would do, which is we'd usually wait till the end of the survey, but timeliness was important. So we just continued to add results as they came in. And that became really critical for campus leadership, including the chancellors and the president, to be able to think about strategies moving ahead. So again, I'm grateful for all the UC campus folks that work so hard to help us at the system. This information is invaluable to helping us understand the students and their experience.
Okay, thank you. Steve, let me go to the next question about significant research findings. Although we should note that Steve was, I'm sorry, were you Vice Chancellor for undergraduate education at Riverside? So he had a similar title, so he's had that, but of course he's a prolific scholar as well. So Steve.
Vice Provost, not Vice Chancellor.
Okay, sorry.
So thank you, John, and thank you everyone for being here. It's great to be able to celebrate 20 years of SERU UQs. I guess what I would like to say is that although it's wonderful that we have this partnership between the student affairs side of the house and the academic side of the house, there's some issues with that as well, and we have had a tremendous interest in building an inclusive campus, which is very important, obviously. And so campus climate has been a big factor, I think, on the student affairs side, and has been very important, as I say. My interest has been on the academic side, and here I've produced, I guess, 6 or 7 journal articles, and we might have our first grad SERU article coming out soon. But my focus has been mostly on academic engagement types of issues, and there's some real issues, problems here, and Gregg's data shows a bit of that with the number of students who study only 10 hours a week. So the pandemic has undoubtedly been a factor, but we're finding that there's little reading. We have to worry about the skill development of our students, given the little reading that is occurring. And I've looked at the UC data on this, and if I recall correctly, it's maybe 50% are saying they do the less than half of the reading for their courses, and that could be an inflated number. So this is something that's really on my mind. I think there's some positive things too. We've discovered how much learning occurs on our campuses due to extracurricular activities, the kinds of things that you can't get in class, but you can get in extracurriculars include chairing meetings, hosting visitors, recruiting people, writing, organizing websites, and so forth. So I think that part of the student experience, which is a very rich part of it in research universities, we've been able to explore with SERU UQ's data, and that's helped to build out the picture. But I guess I would just say that we need to get at the bottom of what's happening academically, because ultimately, although we want inclusive campuses, the whole purpose of higher education, the primary purpose is helping students develop their cognitive and non-cognitive skills. And if we are not doing that, that's a pretty serious problem for us. And getting at the bottom of this, whether it's remote learning or mental health issues or lack of preparation in secondary school, and what we can do about it, given these difficulties, that's an agenda for the future that's going to be important. Thank you.
All right, Steve, thanks a lot. So Julian, I'm going to go to you next and ask you about changes over time in the student population, which I think is significant in Santa Cruz. A little bit of a profile, a little bit like Santa Barbara's at one point, tended to be more white or Euro-American, as some of us call it, but and then it's changed a lot. But also, if you have another comment related to the earlier discussion, not too long, I hope, though. Okay.
Hi, John. Thanks, and thanks for putting this together. And it's so good to see people and think back to, the early development of this survey and what an exciting time it was. And it's almost hard to imagine at this point, but just the ability to collect census data online was really kind of revolutionary at the time, which is hard to imagine now with the proliferation of online surveys. But it was exciting to get to work with the academics. And I would say, the profile of our campus certainly has changed. We're at Annapisi, we're at HSI, and we're very proud of that status. And I would say, just in terms of, we were trying to look back to see what have been some of the changes, especially since even 2010. And we found that there was a lot of stability actually across a lot of the questions, that student experience has remained fairly stable in a way that was actually kind of surprising, but we did see an improvement in the proportion of African-American students and Latinx students who said that they felt respected on campus as a member of their race or ethnicity. And that was really encouraging to see that. So the campus climate for some students seems to have improved, and that was exciting. I do want to go back and quickly say how we've used this and what's been the most effective for us and the way that it's really become institutionalized. And that is that we do use this in program review, and we are able to get data at the level of every individual major. And so what we do, and we started doing this very, very early on, is this was for us at the time when we started, we were not a member of the AAU. So we were not used to having comparative or benchmark data from other campuses. And all of a sudden we had this data from other campuses. And what we did was we started creating these reports for program review for every single major. And we had several different contexts. We had, this is your particular major in relation to all the other majors in your division, which for us is like a school. We also showed it in relationship to all of those same majors on all of the other campuses. And we showed it over time, and we had more history as we went through. And I think that really helped people contextualize it because usually people's first response is 70% are satisfied. Is that good? And so to be able to have a way of putting that in context was really helpful. And that's something that, is just part of our program review. Our committees on our Senate committees look at the data, and that actually contributes to some of the feedback they give to departments. And so that's been really helpful.
Thanks a lot. Program review is really a bread and butter issue to attract campuses, at least in the US. We try to promote the conceptual idea on the international side as well, but that's a program review, and these kinds of things are still kind of an evolving project in various parts of the world. You learn a lot by interacting with various institutions out there that are interested in doing survey work, and Suru specifically. So now to that next question, low response rates and response bias. How bad is it? I'm going to ask anyone in the panel, except for Gregg, to say something, and then I want to have Gregg say something about this, because this is obviously a very important issue. Anyone want to volunteer?
I'll jump in. We've had pretty good success with response rates, not 50%, but sufficient to be able to have good representation across populations and campuses. But this year is different, and we're having some really big challenges. And some of it could be post-pandemic, but I also think there are things that are changing, and there are challenges with student engagement that we're seeing, and there may be longer standing challenges with getting students to be able to complete long surveys. Graduate students we're doing just fine with. We've got really quite good response rates with them. But on the undergraduate side, this is an area that I think is really worth discussing, because emails aren't working. That's not the way that they connect. And we may need to be changing. There we go. Tongshan is always filling in for me. I appreciate that. So we've got a dashboard with our response rates. You can see how it's changing. But this year's a challenge. So I think the modules and other things have been helpful to minimize the amount of questions that each individual is able to get. But there may be a different way that we need to think about how we collect some of this same information with our students in the future.
I think one question that comes up is, you saw those response rates from Berkeley early on, that, it doesn't seem to be sustainable in the more modern era with various other surveys going on, and that's survey governance is a major issue. How many surveys are going out there and whether they're consolidating, and we've made this argument over time that Suru, the surveys provide a wide breadth of information. You can cut down on the number of surveys, but there's this other question that comes up sometimes now because of the scale of our institutions. Maybe it's not the total response rate, but it's just, are we getting a significant number of representative survey responses overall? I don't know. Is there
John, can you please move closer to the microphone so that people can hear you better?
Sorry. Okay. So any case, the question sometimes is it response rates, or it is the number of responses we get, and are they representative of the larger student population? Is there anybody else that wants to make a comment? Ron, would you have a comment?
Yeah, I will.
Oh, Steve. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so I remember that the highest response rate I believe that we have ever achieved, with apologies to Gregg, is University of Florida, when they had a national championship football team and they gave tickets to the bowl game or one of the football games. Not every campus can do that. And there is a big problem. And I think that as we get fewer and fewer responses, it's very difficult to do longitudinal work, and not longitudinal work, but changes over time, because you're not getting the same population necessarily. I don't have any solutions to this. I think, but I will say the other thing that we have to worry about is those who are responding, are they a lot more conscientious than the students, than the average student? We talk about representativeness, but I think we did a little study once saying that the best predictor on whether you're going to graduate in 4 years is if you fill out UQs at least twice, because it was really the conscientious students who were doing it. And there's a lot of students out there who are less conscientious. And so they are part of the student voice, and we should be hearing from them. So if we're not, that's an issue. There have been some proposals about rotating questions, slimming down the number of questions that students answer. And if we can expand the numbers, we'll still get a good size for each of the questions. Maybe that should be explored. But yeah, I think it's a big issue. And I think all of the best thinking in the consortium needs to go into this issue so that we can be confident in the representativeness and the coverage of the responses.
Ron, you had a comment?
Yeah, just kind of going off the University of Florida, where it's a census and they got nearly 70% of their population. We did some analyses of that early on just to see what the distributions of the item responses look like over time. So like when you got to around about 10% of that population, that distributions of items were pretty stable. Anything you added to that was just numbers. So you got larger frequencies, but the shapes of the distributions were nearly identical from a 10% response rate to a 70% response rate. So that was some evidence, I think, of, that representation idea. Maybe you don't need a huge response rate to have representation, but there's a lot of these biases, even that 30% that didn't respond in that population. I don't know how that might have impacted the results, but that was the one institution where we were were the closest to having the full population. And that was kind of an interesting analysis anyways. I just wanted to add that. So
I know Igor and I discussed this a lot, and he has some ideas over time, but again, it's something we need to discuss, continue to discuss among the consortium members. Do you have a comment, Gregg, on this issue?
Well, just to reiterate, Steve, Brint, Riverside in 2000.
It's really hard to hear both John and Gregg. If you can speak up, or maybe Mike is covered by a paper or something, or.
Okay, Igor, can you hear me now?
A little bit better.
Only a little bit better. It seems to me that Riverside almost hit that magic 50% in 2020, 55% for women. The gender gap, again, I want to allude back to. Men are averaging in the 20% response rate for the UC system. But I think, Steve, you probably tried some innovative things on 2020. I think you used Instagram as a way to, as a modality, and you worked with student groups and so forth and so on. So there may be issues of catching up with the student culture that old folks like me in particular are not aware of. And there may be the whole issue of whether a long annual survey is still the model. Seems to me that we've been using that model for so long, where that's not the world that we live in anymore. We live in the world of instant feedback, surveys every week, and so forth and so on. We could even, and we should have the technology. This is a pipe dream maybe, but we should have the technology to have continued flow surveys through the entire year, pick up a few questions every week. I mean, that's just one model. And then the one thing that we haven't done a very good job of, I think, with SERU is to make the survey actually a longitudinal survey, linking it to institutional data as opposed to just cross-sectional data.
Okay, so let's move on to the next question about waving a magic wand. And I know Pamela's going to have an opinion about this. So let's have somebody else in the group, and then I'll go to Pamela. And part of this tension has always been the length of the survey, how consistent are the questions over time for longitudinal analysis. So this is an ongoing discussion that dates back from the very beginning of the project. So anybody want to talk about that? Julian, do you have an opinion about this?
Well, I don't think I necessarily have an answer, but one of the things that's obvious is the interface of the survey hasn't changed since the very beginning. It's very boring. It's questions on a white background, and it just goes on. And it just seems like there should be some, I actually was just thinking about this as Gregg was talking. It almost does seem like there should be a way of, and I know we're not there yet, but is there a way that students could get feedback on responses as they're answering the question, so they're actually seeing what other people have said or getting cumulative responses as they go? Maybe something where you could leave a voice message. That was an idea my colleague Anna Scher had. She really is the person who deals with this on our campus most often. Something more interactive and colorful. It is kind of an old-fashioned instrument at this point.
Okay. Ron or Steve, do you have something you want to add before I go to Pamela?
John,
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Steve.
Okay. So, yeah, I hate to add questions. First of all, I want to say that Minnesota has done a marvelous job in administration, and they've added these dashboards that are extremely helpful, the Tableau dashboards, to be able to compare departments and population groups, and all of that is tremendous. So I think we've seen some real improvements over time. And I hate to add things to a survey that is already too long, but it would be great to know what students feel they've gotten out of college. What are the most important things they've gotten out of college? And another thing that we've tried to do, and I think Tongshan has made some progress on this, connecting the experiences in college to jobs, and the kinds of jobs students are getting, and the extent to which their college experiences have played an important role in not only the jobs they get, but how they're able to perform at work. That would be my dream job. My dream for the project is to make that kind of connection, because obviously they're moving on to something else, and we should be helping them move on successfully to the next chapter in their lives.
Okay, let's go to Pamela, Rona, if that's okay, and then we'll go to the next question. But if you want to add something, you can. Pamela.
Sure, great. I'm putting a link into the chat that is to a series of research that we've done in the office about the value of a degree, which hits some of the things that Steve has talked about and includes some UQ's data within the responses that are there. So we are definitely trying to provide those linkages. I appreciated some of the things that Julian raised. I mean, our students we continue to hope and want our population to better reflect the diversity of California. We have a question at the end of our survey that is, what's the most memorable experience that you've had on your campus? And I sit down and I read thousands and thousands of responses. It's a way for me at the system to try to get connected. And I get a much greater appreciation for the challenges that students are facing. And I think that's part of what we need to think about. The amount of time that they're strapped to do what they've got to do, to study, to do their coursework, to take care of family members, especially during this period. How we engage their time to help us help them I think is going to be important, and maybe it is strategies of smaller surveys that allow us to get to the core that we've had before. I think Ron's point about you don't necessarily need a high response rate to be able to get a sufficient amount to be able to do it. There may be other ways we need to be there, but I am quite sensitive to the challenges that our students are facing, and how we make this as easy as possible for them to be able to provide responses. So it'll be great to get other input from other campuses about that.
Okay, so now we've got about a couple minutes left. I'm going to go to Ron and ask you, Ron, will there still be SERU in 20 years? And I think, I mean, the concept is that there's so much data collection and various forms of institutions learning about their students. And, there's also, which we wanted to integrate more systematically at some point, but we've never had the resources, but some kind of, a focus group follow-ups on key issues. And I think that is happening at some campuses, member campuses, I suppose, but there's other ways to do this. And then obviously with the smartphones and everything else. So it's more complicated, and it's going to get more complicated, and there's going to be different ways of collecting data. So Ron, what do you think? Will we have SERU in 20 years? And if you want to make some other comment about magic wands and changes, you're allowed to do that too.
All right. Well, thank you for the leeway. I think the short answer is I think it will be around in 20 years. I feel confident that that's the case. It's not going to look the same as it does now, obviously. And I think, Julian, you got a good point. It has to adapt. And I think COVID been kind of a good example that higher ed can change and adapt. And I think this survey can adapt as well. And it tried to during COVID. And I think one of the benefits and the beauties of this consortium model is we as a group kind of have a pulse on what information we need on our campuses. And we as a group can change the survey to adjust those needs. And we can be fairly quick in adapting, which is one of the things that really drawed me to SERU versus NESE, for example. I think we also are uniquely positioned as research universities to really be kind of assessing the student experience across all the different levels. I mean, I think grad SERU has kind of shown that that's a need that needed to be addressed, and we've fulfilled it. But I think there's many other areas in professional education, postdocs, where we're starting to do some of that, but we can do more. So I think we can kind of need to address the undergrad question. I think Steve, Julian, Pamela, you kind of brought it all up. We need to think about how we're going to do that. And I think if we can do that, in addition to the other things that we're doing, we're in a good position for 20 years from now, which I probably won't be here, but that's, yeah.
Yep. No, nobody's going to say that. Okay, so any other quick comments here at the end related to this question? No? Okay. Well, I like Ron's answer. Yes. But we'll have to see how life goes on. I mean, we'll all be walking around with chips in our heads and stuff like that. So maybe you don't need surveys. You could just download your thoughts by, Jeff Bezos or somebody. But in any case, I want to thank you so much for this. I thought was a great discussion, and that we got out a lot of issues, and that also, this isn't just a promotional event. This is like we're trying to contemplate and see what value SERU has, and what problems we have and face. But so I want to really thank you. So with that, I don't know if is there anything else, Igor, that you want to say before we go to the next session, or any conclusions?
Oh, I have so many thoughts, especially about the magic wands. But and one thing I just mentioned, one of them is, if I had a magic wand, I would want students to know how the responses that they provided were used in the decision-making process, because that, I think, like, a lot of students don't care, but some do. And I think if, we as institutions can do a better job in communicating that, and create this link between, you know, the survey response and what was done and how it benefited them or their peers, that would be a great idea for a magic wand. But thank you so much. It's been a very engaging panel, a lot of thinking and a lot of ideas. Thank you so much.